Shalom Chaverim and Bruchim Abayim to Sichot HaGeula Redemption Talks. I am myself here today, Rabbi Yitzchak Shapira, a Messianic Jewish Rabbi, sitting with Rabbi Emmanuel Gentilcore, a Haredi Rabbi. We're sitting here in one of the most beautiful places in Israel, a Haredi city, inside our synagogue, to discuss a topic that should be near and dear for all of us, the coming of the Messiah, the Geula. I hope you've been blessed by the previous episodes, and as you notice, this last episode, things start to get a little bit, I don't want to use the term heated up, but they got more intense, and I suspect that things will continue to be intense in this topic, on this discussion. I want to make sure that everybody understands that despite the disagreement on the topic of the Mashiach and perhaps who is the Messiah and maybe what he will do, we have a common goal, is to see the redemption of the entire house of Israel. It is says that Kol Yisrael Yivasha, and any machloket, any disagreement for the sake of heaven is worthy to have. So I hope it will truly, and I hope those who view it will see this as the machloket. Some of you wrote us and say, well, I don't understand why Rabbi Emmanuel was so much resistance. Well, please understand something. I'm a Messianic Jewish Rabbi, and he is an Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Rabbi, and there's a lot of passion also is involved. So I will say for everybody to please understand that we're in this together. I view it together. We have made a commitment to have this difficult dialogue. We are paying a price for having it, and so Rabbi Emmanuel is paying a price to have it. So please continue to be with an open heart throughout this process. In the last episode, we spoke about a concept that calls safek. A safek means a doubt. This specific concept has to do with the safek about the Mashiach. Can the Mashiach be truly Yeshua, as I believe, if there is such a great safek? And Rabbi Gentilcore brought the point that in the case of a safek, and I'll let him make his point here in a minute so he can articulate his point, but the point of the discussion has been around, in a case of doubt, can we truly know who is the Mashiach, and how do we determine things in the case of a safek, and the majority rules. I was thinking about this, how to respond to this, and I saw a very interesting passage just the other day in the Talmud, actually. And it says that during the time of Rabbi Eliezer, son of Horkonos, Ben Horkonos, a Talmid of Shammai, from the house of Shammai, it says in the Talmud that Rabbi Eliezer Ben Horkonos, his knowledge, if in a case of Safek, Horkonos would be equivalent to all the other Chachamim. So if you think about this in the concept of that, is Rabbi Eliezer Ben Horkonos, although it would be one, it can be a Safek. He waited. So I would argue that although the minority, more than likely the minority has been, we cannot say the majority believe that Yeshua was the Messiah, but as we saw in evidence, amazing evidence in the Museum of Israel, in places like Bet Shean, archaeology tell us, even in a place like Bet Alpha, that we have the great ruins, where history tells us into the 4th century, not to the 2nd, not to the 3rd, to the 4th century, Messianic Jews are here, and they are living, and they are thriving, and they are still as Jews. We can learn one thing, to me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, they were not as a minority as one would like to portray, that there are a small group of people, small group of individuals, very poor and very insignificant. If we go back to the 1st century, I would say this is simply not the case, especially in the Galilee. Now, were there a safek in the heart of the mind of the Sanhedrin? More than likely, yes. But in the heart of the people, I would like to contend exactly what historian Rebecca Neer tells us, that 1 out of every 5 people were specifically believing in Jerusalem. 30,000 were believing that he is the Messiah. So in my case, I would argue that that's not a safek. We're not talking about 1 or 2 people. So this is my position, there's perhaps been a suffix in some in the Sanhedrin, although we know that some in the Sanhedrin did believe, but not in all, and definitely not with the common people. Before we get to the topic today, I would like to also give Rabbi Emmanuel, first of all, it's great to have you with us, Rabbi Emmanuel, and be so gracious to be here in your own hometown. Thank you for your hospitality in your home too. Meeting your beautiful two sons, just had a great time. But maybe you want to kind of recap your position. I think I recapped my position. I would like to give you the opportunity to do the same.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi Yitzhak. I'd like to make a quick introduction. I understand that sometimes the discussion gets a little bit heated, and I have to make an adjustment. This is being filmed, and if it goes according to your direction, it'll air, and if not, not. So I just want to make sure that I'm understood, and I also want to make sure I understand you. And I've made it a commitment to really try to do both, be respectful and compassionate, and at the same time not be concerned if my point will be understood. Hopefully there'll be a blog or opportunity to contact me, or contact the people watching through Facebook. Emmanuel Gentlecore is my name. So I'm going to trust that we'll do the best we can. And I think it is important to communicate respectfully. And let me explain a little bit where my challenge was. And because I also got some feedback from you that you had some, right. So we began discussing that there are different Judaisms. And I gave historically how that really didn't start out that way. The first ideas that branched out from mainline Judaism was, let's say, Baisus and Tzodek. I don't know if that's first, actually, could be maybe even by the time of Philo. You had Greek thought that didn't, like Philo, for example, perhaps he did not even accept only the 5 books. He didn't even look at the prophets and the writings as divine, like the 5 books. So that was like a branch, right? But that was not normative. So the same thing with the 4 different groups that existed in the first century, right? You had the Pharisees, which I believe that was the group that really continued a tradition early, where the other groups developed over time, where the Sadducees and the Zealots and the Essenes. So now the question here is, you basically started our program after my introduction, which I appreciate the time telling about introducing me, that Torah is the baseline, and that Torah must be understood through the rabbis, and your intention is not to convert. So now I would only agree with that, right, if Yeshua is the Messiah and he's divine. Because if that were true, and that does represent Judaism, then you're not converting. However, if it's not true, if Yeshua is not the Messiah and he's not divine, then you're bringing the Jewish people to something that's foreign, and therefore that would be considered a form of conversion. And I'm saying that respectfully, but just so you know, perhaps where I could be a little bit agitated. Okay. So as long as but so I think the real issue really is who is the Messiah, and right? And is he divine? Okay. Now the point on suffix. Okay. I think after hearing you and listening to you.
Wait. Let me respond to the first part.
Okay, good. I think that's actually good. One thing at a time.
Yeah, you went backward. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, actually, that's what we spoke about first.
Yes. So let me just respond really briefly and succinctly on that point. So, on the issue of divinity, this is what I say. First of all, we need and we will define what we mean by divinity. Okay. Right. The one thing we can say beyond that shadow of a doubt, looking at first first century, second century, even looking in historical Jewish evidence, on people like Yaakov HaTzadik, for example, the half-brother of Yeshua, who mentioned in Jewish sources, number one, nobody considered them less Jewish or un-Jewish. On the contrary, they call them they call them like a tzaddik, a name like that. Even in Jewish tradition, for example, we see others. I call them the heroes and the stars of the New Testament. People like Peter, for example, we call Shimon HaTzadik, among others. We see it in Jewish literature. So I would say, first of all, number one, there's nobody questioning Jewishness of anybody who following Yeshua in the first century. There's no question. Even the idea of a messianic, hold on, I'll give you a chance, a messianic synagogue, or that is separate from the people, the way they pray. And only Prushim, we know that only Pharisees would have been in a concept of a synagogue. So I don't view this separation come much later. So when I talk about this, when I say I don't choose to convert, I just want to reiterate this. I'm choosing to bring people back to the Judaism that presented in the first century, that believed that Yeshua was the Messiah, believed that Yeshua was the Messiah, and at the same time remain Jewish. This is my definition, truly indeed. Now on the issue of the divinity, I will say this: we have to define what do we mean by divinity, and I'm sure that we will put few episodes to issue of the divinity, because you're right. But to me, it's very simple. I will put the silver line. There are two options on the table. Either Mashiach is more than a regular being, and we have to define it, or those who follow Yeshua, based on his own statements, are really partaking in Avodah Zarah. There is really nothing in between, and any tiptoeing in between is problematic. And again, we have to start with the Torah as a basis. So yeah, we have to talk about the divinity, but we cannot just put it in a broad paintbrush. We have to define what do we mean by divinity, etc., etc. But I will say this: the point of my statement to say, hey, we don't choose to convert this, because I view, again, first century Messianic Judaism as Judaism. As a regular Judaism, another flavor of Judaism. So I'll give you a chance to answer.
Yes, I think that's the very crucial point. How do you understand that, let's say, in the time of Yeshua himself, right, after he got crowds and he was teaching, the Sanhedrin didn't want him, they would have liked to make a trial against him, to do the death sentence against him, but instead they sent him to the Romans. So if it were a brand or a form of Judaism, then obviously it wasn't to the main authoritative body at the time.
You mean the Sanhedrin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, and that's one point. Now, the other point is you mentioned actually Eliezer ben Hyrcanus.
Yeah.
Very interesting. You mentioned him.
Yes.
Because in one of the books I have by Benjamin Lau.
Yes.
And maybe you could bring that book for a minute. He has a whole chapter on
Eliezer ben Hyrcanus.
on the dialogue between the rabbis and the early Christians, right? Now here, I think he was the son of the Rabbi Lau. The struggle, what the rabbis had against the heretics. So now he brings a story that the Romans actually thought that Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was a Messianic Jew. And back then there was a concern for the Romans, and they wanted to put him to death. And he speaks his way out of it. Thank God, he got out of it. But then he had a discussion with Rabbi Akiva.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Akiva said, there must have been some contact you must have had with what a heretic, or in Hebrew it would be a min.
Yeah.
And he thought back, he goes, yes, I had a discussion years ago with Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. And he actually quoted something that Yeshua said, right? Which in fact was something very similar, but I think Beit Hillel said, or even earlier.
Right.
And you know what the question was?
Is that where they made the cave in Cana? Is that where Sachnin? Is that's a different discussion?
I'm asking the point was, if a zona, a prostitute, gives money to the temple for a toilet seat, is that acceptable?
Yes.
So that was interesting halakhic. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus,
and they claimed that he was a Messianic, and you had to go basically through a trial, if I recall correctly.
That's correct. So the question is, Rabbi, for him to go through that ordeal, the wise Rabbi Akiva said you must have had some taste or influence of a heretic. Now the way they looked at, now here we're talking about, I think it was the brother of Yeshua.
Right.
Right, which is, what was his Hebrew name?
No, that was not Yaakov. It was another Yaakov. You know, it was another Yaakov. It's not Yaakov. Yaakov is a general name of the Minim, actually, that they use. It was not in the story. It's not correct that it was the brother of Yeshua. But you are right. His name was Yaakov. His name was Yaakov, but it was not Yaakov.
Okay, we can check that. But the point is, so the point was that the way a Jew who believed in Yeshua was not seen by the rabbis at the time as tzaddik. He was seen as a min, a heretic, to the extent that it was put in the Shmona Esrei Alaminim. So therefore, the ideas that you're teaching, they're trying to show in the Jewish sources is actually. Okay. So now it's my turn to respond to that. Okay, first of all, this is getting very interesting.
You can't dance around the question. The reason I quoted Eliezer Hyrcanus, I quoted it in the context of Safek. Okay, what the rabbi said about Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on Safek, and what they say on Safek, that his weight of his opinion equivalent for everybody is in generation. To make my point that it was not only always the majority, according even to the word of Chazal, because if you have Safek, according to your definition, it was the majority is. But Chazal says that Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, whose opinion weighted as much as everybody else, just his weight. But now let me address also the point that you bring here, because this is a very interesting story that you're bringing out. And actually, I had the privilege to go there to Sachnin and to record there. Number one, we're not talking about Yaakov HaTzadik, his brother. It is another Yaakov. And I can't remember if it's Yaakov of Cana or what Yaakov it is, but that story that you quoted is appearing in Talmud Yerushalmi. Okay, it's not Yaakov, the brother of Yeshua. That is important for everybody to know, because Yaakov, the brother of Yeshua, called it completely Yaakov Tzaddik in Jewish literature. And here is the big point, Rabbi.
Well, listen.
The fact of the matter that he listened to Dvar Torah from the Min, Yaakov Amin, show me something important, that the Min knew Torah. He knew Torah, and he was able to give a midrash to Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. And I think that is the point of the story. The fact that he can give a Dvar Torah. And I'm not saying that they were liked or they were liked by the Sanhedrin. That is not my point at all. My point is that actually the Dvar Torah was given by Amin to Gadol Ador, and he liked it. He liked it in the story, which actually proved my point exactly. Those Minim, they're exactly what we think they're Shomrei Torah. They love the Torah and they're follower of Messiah, and they didn't view it as a contradiction between that. That is my point of the story. So I quoted this ben Hyrcanus in context of Safek. And number two, about Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and the story of the Min here, he's giving Dvar Torah, and the Dvar Torah is actually being liked. Of course that Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is going to have an issue with this, because the Sanhedrin would get very, very angry at him and said, what are you doing? And you have to go to trial. And they said, are you a Min? Okay, and the last thing, you mentioned Tfilat Shmonai, so the 18th benediction. The 19th benediction of the Minim we know that it came and did the tikkun by Shmuel HaKatan later in Yavne, much later of the destruction of the temple, okay? This come later to specifically to have a plot to remove them from the synagogue. And how do we know this? We read in Yerushalmi a very interesting sugya. It says in Yerushalmi what to do if Amin, which is Ma'amin Yeshua Notzri, if he wants to become a chazan in the synagogue. What do you do with Amin who wants to become a chazan in the synagogue? Now, if they put it in Yerushalmi, a possibility that Amin can be a chazan in the synagogue, they wouldn't write it if it was not a possibility. Well, I would say to you, why would Amin be in a synagogue? Why would Amin be in a synagogue to begin with? He would be in a synagogue because he worshipped as a Jew, he practiced Judaism, he studied Torah.
Okay, very good. I'm glad you brought that up. So, so as far as Rebbe Eliezer ben Horkos, I understand you brought it for the point of suffix, which I'm going to get to in a moment, but you also went in at length to show that even according to one scholar, 1/5 of the population was Messianic. I have to look into that. Okay.
Let me be specific, in Yerushalayim.
In Yerushalayim, okay. Yeah, so now, but you're basically stating that this was a Judaism, right? So my point was that the way, now you could, on one hand, you have someone quoting Yeshua, right? Now, the problem wasn't the statement. Listen very carefully. Because that statement, anything that I understand, not anything, but most statements that are taught in the Your Brit Chadashah, right? When they're quoting the Holy Scripture, so if they're doing so properly, then basically they're quoting Torah. Now, but here, the problem is not the statement, but who said the statement. It was right? It was a follower of Yeshua. So, and that was something that is anyone who followed Yeshua at that time. We're talking Rabbi Akiva, right? He lived 120 years, but it wasn't so far long after Yeshua.
Yeah, true.
And they were considered heretics. And also Shmuel HaKatan, who devised the 19th thing, it was in the time of the Tanoim, and that you actually had a big community. It took some time to get the Hebrew Christian community going. So it's very clear from the Sanhedrin in the time of Yeshua, from Rabbi Akiva, that if one believed in Yeshua, right, then it's heretical. Now, beyond that, you mentioned the idea of trying to remember now. The issue of suffix, right? So now, I understood your point, and I even helped you with your point. And I think your point is, to make sure I understand you, because I think this is important, right? That originally, with the 10 spies, right, 2 of the people wanted to listen to Moshe and go into Eretz Yisrael. And 8 of them said, no, they're too big, too strong, we don't want to go. So now, how we should...
There's a suffix.
If there's a suffix, now, and if we should, don't know what to do, we should follow the majority, but the majority was the 8 that did not want to go. So there I explained that the reason why we follow the 2, because they followed Moshe Rabbeinu, who had a direct link to God. So in that case, there is no suffix because it's coming from Moshe Rabbeinu, right?
Okay.
So now what you're saying is that even though Yeshua and his followers was a clear minority, what I understand your claim is that Yeshua is different. He's above the rabbis. He's in fact, the way he's portrayed, the rabbis don't know, the Pharisees don't know, and he's the master, and he is, quote unquote, what later is understood, not too much later actually, that he's divine. So if just like Moshe Rabbeinu had a clear link to Hashem, and therefore he's the minority, the people who follow him when it came to the land of Israel, so too the Jews who followed Yeshua are a minority, right? And but Yeshua is on a different class. He has a much better connection to God, because some say he's the Son of God, and therefore right? That the fact that there are people that you'll find caves in Messianic communities, that doesn't prove anything except for the group of people that believed. But the power of your argument is that the minority sometimes, you can go with the minority when it's linked to Hashem. Is that what you're basically saying?
Okay. So
because I want to react to that, but I first want to understand.
Yeah. So let me, first of all, to answer two things.
Yeah.
Let me start with the first point. It's fresh in my mind. I have to recap it quickly because I know we have a lot to talk about. But let me try. First one. Number one, on the issue of Yaakov, the man named Yaakov, and the story of the men who have in this. Discussion with Eliezer ben Orthodox. The point of the issue is not, it's not, you said the point is not what he says, the point is who said it.
Because he was a believer in Yeshua.
Yeah, but you see, to me, what makes something Jewish or not is not who said it, but really what is the hashkafa of the person who said it. The point that I'm trying to, I'm not saying that they were loved by the Sanhedrin and by the Av Bedin and all of those people. You know, in the 5th generation of the Tanaim. This is not my point. My point of the matter is that what he given him, what he said to him is Dvar Torah. It's a word of Torah that is given to him that is not contradicting, and therefore the Hashkafa of the early Messianic Jews were in the framework and the boundaries of Judaism. They did not cross over outside, okay? So that's number one. But I do know that we have to end on the suffix. We have to end the program with a doubt.
Can I just one point?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the synagogue. That's my whole point. That if it were clearly wrong, like let's say we're Satan worshippers, then there'd be no problem. But here you have people who are speaking Torah. So the most dangerous thing is to say some truths, and with that truth, sheker, and therefore they wanted to flush them out of the Beit Knesset. But they could be in the Beit Knesset, serve God in their understanding, and yet believe in Yeshua.
Rabbi Manuel,
this is a good discussion.
Yeah, this is a very good discussion,
right.
And I appreciate your point. So you say that it's not that necessarily they were completely heretical, they had a lot of Divrei Torah, but they mix it with other things, and they basically kind of muddied the water.
That's exactly why Sifrei Chitzonim are not, we're not allowed to learn them because it's dangerous. It's a mixture of truth and falsehood.
Yeah, so
if it were clearly falsehood, it wouldn't be such a danger.
So,
do you understand?
I understood your point. So I think, here's the way I view this. The issue was not, I don't believe that we're Messianic Jews. Look, I don't believe that Messianic Jews in 1st century, 2nd century even, had a little label on them, and they put a little M on them, and they were labeled by the community, because even the places that archaeology shows us that there were Messianic Jewish village, okay? I'll give you an example, in a place in the Golan called Kanaf. It's a settlement, okay? Kanaf, for example, or in some places in the Galilee, we see Jewish cities. Even in a place like Bet Sha'arim, the House of Gates, where Yudah Hanasi was buried and wrote, canonized the Mishnah, we're seeing Messianic Jews living there with Jewish people. So here is my argument, the counter argument for you would be this. If truly there's so much off that they are completely in divrei miniyut to this level, what are they doing? Living, and I'll take it to even further, burying with the pits of bones like Jews, okay? They clearly bury the dead according to Jewish halacha. There's just no argument about this, okay? They are clearly in the villages. So if you say to me, let me put it in the 21st century, I'm a Messianic Jew, and I come to you right now and I say, you know what, Emmanuel? Hey, I want to live in Beitar Elite. You know why? Because I love it here. The air is good, food is a little bit cheaper, I love this falafel stand there. And you know that I'm a Messianic Jew. And the owner of this synagogue find out a Messianic Jew buy a house next to the shul. Do you think they will allow me to live here? Absolutely not. They would not allow me to live here. And the reality, I'll let you respond to that. They would not allow me to live here. The reality is Messianic Jews are among the people and with the people. And that's why Yerushalmi is giving us an example of a possibility of a chazan in the synagogue being Amin. And you know, I can pull the references, we can look at that in further episode, no problem. I have them in my, all of them, we can look at that together. If it was not a possibility, Yerushalmi, that deal with what's happening inside the land of Israel, would not even be written. That is my point.
Okay, now I have a very important response to you.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank God I have a notebook that I can write something down.
I wish I had one. I'm a little holy. I have a.
Would you want some piece of paper? I'll be happy.
It's okay. Go ahead.
That's also, I also felt that I cut you off a little bit the last time.
No problem.
So I wanted to try to make it up, and that's why I invited you into my hometown.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you met my family.
Thank you so much.
So now, the early Christians, you know, we can know whether or not they were true or good or bad. This question actually was raised by none other than Rabban Gamliel, as recorded in your New Testament. And it was a debate, because here they are, they're in the synagogue, but they're believing Yeshua is the Messiah. And at that point, there's a scholarly debate if they, at that point, believed in Yeshua as divine or not. Some say that it was early on that they believed that he was divine. And one of the arguments is that if Paul of Tarsus, who was Saul, went against them so much that he was persecuted them, so there must have been something serious. So what would be serious? Believing in his divinity. And this is why early on it was understood that the early Christians could have thought that he's divine. But my point is, Rabban Gamliel is, what do? We don't know. It's not clear, because they're doing mitzvot, they're burying their dead, like you say, they have a little community. But it raised the question, there's something's different here. Is that difference okay or not? And he didn't push them away and say, no, they should get persecuted and send them to the Sanhedrin for the death penalty. What did he do? He says, we're going to sit and we're going to see what is going to come from these Messianic Jews. Right? And what happened was, they died out within 2 centuries. By the 4th century, there is no more. That historically proves Rabban Gamliel. And I see you're smiling. My point is not. But I'm going to give you another. With this, there was another group called the Karaites.
Sure.
Right.
Much later.
Right.
Much later.
You know. But the first Karaites are very similar to the Samaritans, who did not believe in the oral tradition. Right. And what's interesting is they survived. The Karaites survived, even though they believed in the oral tradition, but they didn't believe in Yeshua, that he was divine.
True.
Right? They
didn't believe in Yeshua at all. Karaite do not believe in Yeshua.
Right. So therefore we see a contrast of what's considered kosher or not kosher, even though you wrote the kosher pig. So we see there, to the extent that the Karaites, in the 12th century, they wrote the first counter-missionary book by Isaac Troki, right? And he was a Karaite Jew, because his point was the Christians at the time are not believing in the oral tradition, and we have to show them from the verses themselves that Yeshua is not the Messiah. And he wrote a whole book called Faith Strengthened, and he was a Karaite Jew. So I think my point rests that the belief in Yeshua and belief in his divinity is something that did not continue, and it was heretical, whereas something that was off, like Torah Shabbat Peh, it even continued.
Okay, so let me tell you why I don't believe that your argument.
One last point.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You mentioned something. If it was found out that a Messianic Jew, right, was discovered in Beitar, they would throw him out. Right. Well, it's interesting. I want to respond to that. There actually is a couple of Messianic Jews right nearby in Sor Hadassah, believe it or not. Right. I'm not going to say who. He may not want to have his identity revealed. He's a nice guy. Anyway. So, but this happened in Baltimore. Baltimore is a Orthodox community in the United States, and there was a Messianic family, the Taylor family. Penina Taylor at the time was a leader in the Messianic movement. She was trained by a Campus Crusade for Christ, and it was her non-Jewish husband that said, we have to tell them who we are. They had a mission. They wanted to be smile. They had a very similar thing in Manhattan that went to Chicago recently about this couple. That was discovered. You saw that on Facebook. So we have to tell them who we are. And they went before the rabbi.
Yep.
Right? And
Yep.
you know what happened? She said her beliefs. And did he kick her out? No. He says, you could stay and you could pray with us. Your kids can continue to go and learn in the cheder, the Jewish school, only on one condition, that they would sit and learn with someone once a week. And through that discussion, she realized she made a mistake.
Okay.
And her husband converted, and all the kids convert, and the whole family lives in Efrat here in Israel.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for sharing this story. Somebody who was Israeli, born in Israel, lived at least part of his life in a community that's not even ultra-Orthodox, but definitely necessarily in the T community. I can tell you, this is maybe work in Baltimore, but that will not work in...
I do believe the sensibilities in Israel are quite different than America.
Yeah, it will not work in Mea Shearim, and it will not work in Beitar. That is my personal opinion.
No, I hear that. In fact, I even saw signs by one of the religious groups, Eida Charedis, or one of them, that if you're allowed to break Shabbat in order to save a Jew who believes in Yeshua. I think there was such a sound.
That's a new halakha. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Anyway.
So let me. Wow. Where do I start in answering you? I wish I had a piece of note to write everything that I wanted to say. Can you, in 2 sentences for me, real quick, recap your 2 points for me, really quick, in one word or 1 sentence, because I want to respond to them. So first of all,
I think we did.
Yeah,
we covered.
No. This point is very important. So okay, let me try just to do it for my own sanity going forward. So number 1, I want to deal with Gamliel. You're actually making my point, Rabbi.
Good, Baruch Hashem.
You're making my point. If it is in Avodah Zarah, if they were completely in Avodah Zarah, then Gamliel would say, hey, they're not Jewish. Hey, they're stop being Jewish. The fact that Rabban Gamliel say, hey, I am washing my hand from this thing, I do not want to judge, mean that there is no clarity that they are outside of Judaism. And that is my exact point to you. This is my exact point to you. If they were said, the second thing, if they were Masitim, if they were truly Masitim to any other faith against Judaism, then their punishment, they would be much greater. Number 3, the fact of the matter, again, this is the point that I think, the number 1 point that I would like to make to you. We have evidence that all the way up to the 5th century, almost going to the 6th century, not by what I am saying. No, let's say you're a Messianic Jew, you have an agenda, but I can show you the empirical evidence by those archaeologists, historians, that say there are Jewish people living here in the land of Israel who live and worship as Jews. Not 1st or 2nd, 5th and 6th, and they are still Jewish, and they believe in Yeshua, Messiahship. Okay, so it's not true that after 70 AD, and
never said that. But
but you mentioned, you said 2nd century. That's what you actually.
I think
you say 2nd. No. But I want to make it clear to everybody that there are Jewish people here worshiping and living as Jews all the way, at the very least, to the 5th century. And actually, it's interesting when you go with historians like Eldad Kainan, who have no agenda. He show you the transition, how they slowly departing from Judaism. Okay, but even as they departing in Judaism, let's say in place like where Yehuda Nasi, Bet Sha'arim, you still want to. They identify themselves as Jews, okay? They for sure identify. And I'm not saying, by the way, I want to make very clear, to be honest, that everybody in the religious authority accept them is completely. But I'm talking about the Am Haaretz, the common people, had no problem with their Jewishness. Okay, because they're there in the Jewish city. So you want to tell me that we can even find places where we can see Jewish burial site? And when I'm talking Jewish, I'm not talking Messianic. Regular Jewish burial site. And side by side we see a Messianic Jewish sites, burial. That doesn't make sense to me. If halachically during this time they already viewed as not Jewish, what then a non-Jew does buried next to a Jew? They clearly Jewish. They're still enough to observe and recognize them as Jewish. So that is my point to you. And again, Gamliel for me is actually a key, because he's saying, I'm washing my hands off this thing. They were successful. I would say that they were a great success, because it became Ola Goim, but like anything else, there was something that went wrong, and that something that went wrong is something I would love to talk to you in a future evidence. But that's why I said from the very first episode, we must make a separation between what happened after the 4th century, especially with the Goim and the understanding of Paul, to what happened before with the early Messianic Jews. We have to make Havdalah and separation.
I think the fact that you're trying to squeak out another century is really not the issue, whether it's 4th or 5th. The issue goes much more deeper than that. But I will explain, because I did study this historically.
Yeah,
right?
so did I.
Baruch Hashem. So then you would hopefully agree to what I'm about to tell you, that historically the early Hebrew Christians were persecuted, and even though they existed into the 4th and you want even 5th, but their numbers got less and less, not more and more. And that's for sure. And because the milieu of the situation is, once the Catholic, the Roman Empire started to take on Christianity.
And that's 4th century.
Right? Okay, so then they forbade people who believed in Yeshua to be Shomer Mitzvot. So therefore what you're saying is not entirely accurate, that they were, bona fide Jews and buried together. The point is, you could not. One of the reasons why they became extinct, whether it's the 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th century, was because of it was the words of Rabbi Gamliel that were fulfilled. That we see what became of them. And even without that, there was a historical political situation that existed, that you could no longer really exist in the church being observant. Again, it comes back to my other point, that was a question in a synagogue, they're observant. The question was, and he washed his hands, he doesn't know, what do they believe? And it's very hard. They look like me and you, but their belief is very different. And therefore, they needed to be flushed out, and that's why you have the 19th prayer in the Shemona Esrei, against the heretics.
So if they truly were that different, again, you did not answer this question, so I'll give you a chance to answer it. Again, let me ask it plainly. Why would the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, that we both agree is an accurate historical account of what's happening in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, why would it give us the possibility that the Chazan in the synagogue, the Baal Kriya, which really the one who lead the prayer inside the synagogue, that he is a follower of Yeshua? Why would it even be discussed?
See,
this is history. We cannot argue with that.
Okay, well, let's look at that. It's interesting how we could look at the same things,
yes,
and you think it's a proof for you, and I think it's a proof for me. So let's try to look at this a bit more carefully. Okay, let's first go to the first example, Yeshua himself. A lot of Christians and Messianic Jews will say, he was in the synagogue and he read from the scroll of Isaiah. Right? What can be more kosher than that? Right? Does it show that he was a scholar? Does it show that he was accepted?
No.
It showed he had the ability to read the scroll. That's what it shows. And you know what's interesting though? In the account is that we could see many examples of the apologetic agenda that's not accurate in the Brit Chadashah, because as it's quoted in Isaiah, it's misquoting Isaiah, right? About feeding the poor. There was actually, if you look at the text and go back to the Holy Scripture, there's an inserted line or two. So, but we see that Yeshua himself was in the synagogue and he read, and what came of him is the Sanhedrin didn't want him to live. And I believe he quoted a lot of things, the Sermon of the Mount, a lot of beautiful things. However, there was, even from the beginning, he said, it was said, to love your neighbor, but I say, to love your enemy. and he spoke about the Pharisees that what do you mean you can't heal on Shabbat? Which, by the way, that's not the Pharisees would agree you can heal, but you can't do malacha in order to heal, unless if it's the rabbis would say unless if it's pekuach nefesh, unless if it's life-threatening.
Let me answer. You still dance around my question. You didn't answer the question.
Really?
I asked the very.
I answered you. You asked me.
Right. Why would the Talmud? I'm not. You jumping to attack the New Testament, but I'm asking you from the resource that you accept.
Right.
I'm not even quoting the New Testament. So listen carefully, I'll ask again. Why would the Talmud Yerushalmi give us a possibility that Amin will be the Baal Kriya and be in
I heard your question.
So you didn't answer.
A Baal Kriya is similar to someone reading one is leading the davening, and then you have a Baal...
That's a leader in a synagogue. Yeah. You know that. You know that. A person who leads Shacharit service, in a shul, it's somebody who's considered a leader in the synagogue. That
doesn't make someone kosher. In fact, you have, I'll give you an example. You had a shul, there was a Messianic Hungarian Jew in the early 19th century, right? He was suffering during the war, and he was Messianic, and slowly he started giving sermons that were talking about Yeshua, and he was the rabbi of the synagogue. Just because someone can be in a position, you have in Messianic synagogues. So you say it was a regular synagogue. So again, it was he looked like everyone else, and he probably had the ability.
Rabbi, the reason he looked like everybody else, because he practiced Judaism.
Right.
And we cannot say that they didn't practice Judaism.
So because if he put on a tallis and he put on tefillin,
they were not playing Purim game.
Right. But that point is the avodah zarah, right, is something very serious. So the question is, did he believe Yeshua was divine at that point? If you want, the truth is, I'll look into it specifically for you and be happy to address it.
We're going to have several episodes to talk about the divinity. Right. But again, if somebody is even suspected...
Messianic Jewish becomes kosher because a person was a chazan, and it's ridiculous.
First of all,
it doesn't make sense, this argument to me.
I want... No. This is my point.
Yes.
I want you to please listen carefully to what I'm saying. If a person is suspected of being in any form of avodah zarah, there is no way, Jose, not 2,000 years ago, not 2,000 years later, that he can lead a service in a synagogue. Even today, in a synagogue, if you go and you say, they find out you're following avodah zarah, they will not count you as part of a minyan today in a synagogue. That is the case. So that's number one.
Was it clear that that's my point. The Rabbi Gamliel, it wasn't clear. If it was clear that he was avodah zarah, you're right.
But they knew they followed Yeshua. They knew that they're following Yeshua.
At that point, was Yeshua clearly to follow him was avodah zarah? And if it was a new movement, maybe it was kosher, maybe not. That was the whole question. So therefore, I think I am answering you. It was a question.
Look, the fact of the matter that they're there, and they are potentially...
Are you hearing my point?
I'm hearing your point.
What's my point?
Your point is very, very simple. Just because they dress as Jews, they look as Jews, the distinction was not very, very clear yet. You're saying it was not
clear.
They need to do a perun. They not, because they were not. If there is even a safek, and this is my point, if there is a safek, we're coming back to another form of safek. Right. If there is a safek, they would already pull them out. Here is, I'm going to give you another opinion, okay? This is not my opinion. This is the opinion of Dr. Rivka Nir, who wrote a book called The Early Jewish Christianity. And here's what she said, I quote her. She says, Dr. Rivka Nir says, although we are looking at the term minim as a lexicon that apply to whoever go from the Jewish norm, the Pharisaic Jewish norm, most researchers believe that is more than likely is a term that is applied to Jews, Christians, but also to Christians as a whole, okay, not even non-Jews. The Notzrim, the Christians, it was a term of hostility already during the time of the temple. before the destruction of the temple, hostility, okay, hostility. And there it says, but, okay, but the plots against the minim become greater during the time post destruction of the temples, if Yavne, okay, and they create a need to push them and to put a clear boundary between what is Judaism and what is outside of it, and that's when the 19th benediction was added. And here is the conclusion. This is the point I'm trying to get to.
So far,
no, but I wanted to say this. It says the takana, the tikkun, the decree of the blessing of the curse of the minim had a goal. And the goal was, and again, we can agree that it's roughly 90, most historians say about 90 AD. That's when the minim, the Birkat HaMinim is added to Shmona Esrei. It says it had a goal, and the goal was to kick out the Messianic from Jewish society and from the synagogue. The min was not one to curse himself, or to be cursed by other, and therefore to be coming out of this example, he had to forcefully move himself. And that's why Rivka Nir says, and she quoting the book of John, Yochanan, chapter 20, it says, therefore the parents, she quotes, she's quote divorce to show us also the accuracy of the New Testament in this regard. She's relying this on Jewish resources on the New Testament. Therefore, the parents said that they were afraid from the head of the synagogue, and therefore they decide to lenadot. Lenadot in Greek, aposelgigos genetai, which mean that anybody who admit openly that is Mashiach will be kicked out. The point of the matter is they're Jews. They worship as Jews, and the reason it's become an issue to the Jewish leaders. I'm not talking the people. The people I had no problem. To the leaders is because the popularity of those Messianic Jews during this time. There were Chazanim, there were Baalei Kriya, there were Baalei Torah, there were everything in the synagogue. The issue became with the leaders, not with the Jewish people as a whole. And that's my point.
Okay. So I'll now try to respond specifically to what you're saying.
Okay.
So it's very interesting. I hear that, and it only shows to me that the reason why they had to flush out the believers, it wasn't just like a political leadership. We don't like this group and we're going to kick them out. The reason why was because of their belief was not. I'll give you an example. And around that similar time, before the destruction of the temple, you had various rites that were done by the priests, and sometimes the Pharisees, the Sadducees, used to make it difficult for the rabbis to do their services. So there was definitely a contention, let's say, between, for example, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And in fact, there was disputes. For example, after Pesach, right? It says in the Torah about the Omer. When should you start
after
counting?
The day after of the Sunday.
Right, the day after. So the Torah itself says Shabbat.
Yeah.
And the literalists say it means the Shabbat.
After Shabbat, Sunday, Yom Rishon. Depends how you define Shabbat.
Right, but the rabbis, the Pharisees at the time understood.
The day after Pesach.
Right. So now that was a debate, right? Again, that's an earlier debate. Those rabbis, the Pharisees, which became Judaism today, that if one does not believe, right, in the Torah Shebaal Peh, they are not Jewish, even to this day. Now, as you mentioned, that Torah is the baseline, and as it's understood through the rabbis, right? So therefore, even Ad Hayom, you have the 10 Shvatim, The 10 tribes that separated from Yoram ben Ahavat, rebelled, and then eventually they went into the diaspora, right. And then you have Ethiopian Jews that kept certain Torah, and they weren't aware of certain Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition. So the legal proceeding was, they were not sure, but they have to go to the mikveh. They have, in order to be Jewish. So in other words, Torah it's very important to follow Torah as it's understood by the rabbis. So now, similarly, if you have someone leading the services, so and the idea is that who makes a decision who's a Jew, who's not a Jew, who needs a mikveh, who's not a mikveh? It's the rabbis, it's the people that are head of the community, not the omnein am, not the common person. Here you have people that are on the street, Habibi, we're friends. Where they're not interested if it's a avodah zarah or is it not a avodah zarah. That's how I would answer you.
Okay. So we have 2 minutes.
Okay.
Here I'm just going to conclude with these 2 points. Right. I'll conclude, and then you will make the conclusion because we must also conclude. Number 1 on the Torah Shebaal Peh, I want to say on that. You say according to the rabbinical understanding. This is a very important point. We have 5 generations of Tanaim, 5 generations until Yehuda the Nasi from Hillel and Shammai. The entire 5 generations are ironing out what is the Havana, what is the understanding of the Torah Shebaal Peh. The Torah Shebaal Peh, as we know it...
Can I help you on that one point? You're talking, this is the 1st century, just after the temple. We're not talking the 5th century when we ironed out...
No, I'm not talking about the 5th century. I'm talking from we're talking about from the moment that Yehuda the Nasi closed out the Mishnah.
That's 200.
220.
Okay, yes.
So we have 5 generations of Tanaim. There's 5 generations from Hillel HaZaken, Hillel Veshammai, all the way to Yehuda Nasi. Those 5 generations, what will ultimately give us the Mishnah. So it's not fair to me to say, we have to agree with everything the Rabbi said, especially not in the 1st generation and 2nd generation. Why do I say that? Because even in 1st and 2nd generation, we read about the arguments in the time of Hillel and Shammai when they arguing. There's only 18 halachot, for example, that Shammai was overruled by Hillel, and the guard are standing, and because the vote is taking place. This was developing. The what we call the oral interpretation, the understanding, is work in progress into the 3rd and 4th and 5th generation. So it's not so clear and cut and dry to say this. So that's important, number 1. And in many cases, I will even say that the Brit HaChadasha would agree on the oral interpretation. I'll give you one example. In the book of Acts, we read about the Talmudim. This is again after Yeshua already departure, and this. It says that they are walking in the Shabbat, a Shabbat day walk. What is a Shabbat day walk? Tell me. The Oraita. Where does it say what Shabbat day walk is? It doesn't say. It is a rabbinic takana that was accepted. And one of the things we see again and again and again in the New Testament, that it's rely a lot on oral tradition. For example, another example, we see the argument about the body of Moshe Rabbeinu between Satan and between Gabriel. We see this. Those things are not finding in scriptures. The authors of the New Testament clearly know Jewish tradition and Jewish interpretation. So number 1, I want to say there is not a conclusive, and I'm talking about the right time Yeshua lived, 40, 50 AD, etc. There is no consensus on oral interpretation. It's developed, it's being work in progress. Then now number 2, I think is even more important.
Can I answer one at a time?
Let me finish. This one is a quick one. You said, what is the big deal? You said earlier, what's the big deal about Yeshua going to the synagogue and reading? Well, it's a big deal for 2 reasons. And I will tell you what's the big deal. Number 1, it's a big deal because the fact that he's going to the synagogue, it's a big deal. A synagogue is a Pharisaic invention. It's not something that related to a Sadducees or any other group. The fact of the matter, Yeshua is associating with himself with the Pharisaic Judaism. That makes it big deal on itself. It's telling us the hashkafa of Yeshua, that he's coming from a better midrash and Havana. Number two, here is the big deal. The fact is, people read it and they say, well, Yeshua just came up and he go up and he read. You yourself know it as an Orthodox Rabbi, that you cannot just go up to the Torah and read. You have to be la'alot la Torah. You have to be called up to the Torah.
He read the Haftorah in Isaiah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's true, he read from Isaiah, that's the Haftarah. The point of the matter is, a person who is called up to the Torah or to Haftarah is a person who is honored and is respected in the community. A person, this is
what the Brit HaKadosh is trying to paint, that picture. But I could tell you...
I'm just simply answering to you.
Right, but he read the wrong text.
Well, that's not what the text says. That is not what.
No, if you compare it, you'll check it out.
Okay,
you check it out. That's my homework to you.
Okay, I will be glad to do it. Okay. But anyway, so the conclusion to me, and I'd like you to. Those are the 2 points that I want to do. It's a huge deal that in the Pharisaic synagogue, it's a huge deal that there is not consensus on the Torah Shebe'al Peh, on the Takanot and Halachot, and that's why Yehuda Hanasi have to close it. So the bottom line for me is this. And we'll leave it because obviously we're going to conclude this episode with disagreement. Yeshua, his followers had a great influence on Jewish history, period. They lived as Jews, they were inside the Jewish villages, and they clearly died as Jews as well. No issue about this with a Jewish hashkafa. That's what makes them Jewish, the way one walk out his faith. Halachically, they definitely were Jewish. They live with the Jewish hashkafa. And the fact of the matter is, the reason they're being kicked out from the synagogue later on is because the popularity and the threat, even to the point that they can lead a shacharit, a morning prayer or Shabbat service in the synagogue. I'm done. I'll give you the final word for this episode.
Okay. So it's very interesting. You're quoting scholars like Nir, and we're going to discuss when you quote Libes.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that you're trying to pull information, and I think it's rather skewed. It's like from the outsider looking in, trying to find points that support your belief. But let me give you, I'm not just going to say a outlandish statement, I want to give you examples.
Okay.
So, I hope I could read my writing here. You mentioned that the law wasn't really final, and it took 5 generations until
the Torah Shebe'al Peh, I said.
The editing of the Mishnah was 220 AD.
Right.
So I want to bring something out to you. That's on one hand. On one hand, there was things were still in question. But on the other hand, you're saying the synagogue, that's the acid test that someone's good or is correct or not. So first of all, it just reminds me, my son happens to be a very nice voice. You met him, Hillel. So when he goes to the synagogue, even though he's young, they'll ask him to read the Haftorah, just because he was able to nicely read it. And I don't know how much different it would be back then. But my point really is, right, that the truth is, the earlier you go, the more strict in the halacha you had. The Sanhedrin, for example, was in the Lishkat HaGeuz of the temple. But then with our sins, and we were about to have the temple destroyed, it slowly, even before the temple was destroyed, it slowly moved away from there. So I'm saying in the time of Yeshua, which was 40 years before the destruction, in a Sanhedrin, which is the highest legal authority, they didn't want him to live. And then around the time of the destruction, you had people flushing out the temple already from these people. So to say that they were part and parcel of the Jewish community is just totally a skewed, inaccurate understanding.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. You want to make any other point?
Let me think. Let me see what I wrote here.
I think it's a good conclusion.
Okay.
So friends, we both presented our case. This has been a good discussion. We're going to now move in the next episode to talk about Geula, but I hope you enjoy. Rabbi Emmanuel, thank you for opening your heart to us in this episode. Guys, if you are blessed by this type of discussions, please consider subscribing. There's going to be very soon a blog coming up that we will be able to have those dialogues back and forth, Q&A in written form as well. We're working on a new website called Redemption Talks that's going to be up very, very soon. But if you're blessed by this, all of this take resources to build. So consider supporting this avodah. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. We're continuing to build this onion together. Join us every Sunday at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. God bless you and litraot.
And I would like to add something.
Israel. Okay, last word.
Okay, the last word that what we'll plan to do is show in black and white is Rav Yitzchak representing the Torah text or not, and we're going to try in the following sessions and get into the points themselves, but I think at least you have an idea of the different approach that we do have.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much. God bless you, and we'll see you next week. Shavua Tov.